The grand ballroom erupted in cruel laughter as Alina stumbled, her worn shoes catching on the marble floor, sending a silver tray clattering across the polished stone. But the laughter died the instant the towering golden door swung open and the king himself strode in, his eyes locked, not on the nobles and their jewels and silk, but on the trembling maid in the corner. And what happened next would change everything. Alina had worked in the royal palace for nearly 20 years, her hands raw from scrubbing, her back bent from carrying, her face lined with exhaustion that made her look older than her 43 years. And every single day she endured the mockery of the other servants, the sneers of the noble ladies, the dismissive waves of the lords who saw her as less than human, as simply part of the furniture, a shadow meant to serve and never be seen. She lived in the smallest room in the servants' quarters, a space barely large enough for a narrow bed, and a wooden chest that held everything she owned, 3 faded dresses, a silver locket she never opened, a worn prayer book, and a small cloth bundle she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, something she hadn't looked at in years but could never bring herself to discard. The other maids whispered about her constantly, wondering why she never fought back when Lady Cordelia threw hot tea in her face for serving it to cool, why she simply bowed and cleaned up when Lord Harrison knocked an entire feast table over in drunken rage and blamed her for its placement, why she smiled softly even when the head housekeeper, Mrs. Rothschild, assigned her the most degrading tasks and gave her no time to rest. She's simple-minded, they said, probably doesn't even understand she's being insulted. And they laughed behind their hands, imitating her quiet voice, her gentle way of moving, her habit of humming old lullabies while she worked in the pre-dawn darkness. But what none of them knew, what Alina had never spoken of to a single soul in all these years, was that she had once been something entirely different, someone whose name was spoken with reverence, whose hands had held something far more precious than scrub brushes and laundry. She had once held the life of a child, a boy of 7 with golden hair and frightened blue eyes, lost in the woods during a terrible storm, burning with fever, calling for his mother. And she had found him, sheltered him, nursed him back to health in her small cottage at the edge of the forest, sung to him the same lullabies she hummed now, fed him broth and bread, wrapped him in her only blanket, and when the royal guards finally came searching 3 days later, she had simply handed him over without a word about reward or recognition, disappearing back into her simple life, while the entire kingdom celebrated the young prince's miraculous return. The boy had cried when they took him, reaching for her, calling her angel, and she had smiled and told him, "Be brave, little one, you are meant for great things, and I will always remember you," never imagining that she would see him again, never knowing that he had spent years searching for her, asking every servant, every villager, describing the cottage, the lullabies, the kind woman with sad eyes who asked for nothing in return. 15 years had passed since then, and Alina had fallen on hard times, her cottage burned in a fire, her small savings stolen, her health declining and, with nowhere else to turn, she had sought work at the palace, using a different name. Her appearance so changed by hardship that no one recognized the woman she had been, and she preferred it that way, because fame and recognition meant nothing to her. She had helped that child because it was right, because he needed her, because kindness required no audience and no reward. The young prince had grown up and been sent abroad for his education and military training, and in his absence, the palace had grown cold, the servants petty and cruel, the nobles self-absorbed and heartless, with no one to model true leadership or compassion. And Alina had watched it all with quiet sadness, continuing to serve, to clean, to endure, finding purpose in small acts of hidden kindness, leaving bread for the hungry stable boy, mending clothes for the scullery maid who had no skill with a needle, sitting with the elderly groundskeeper when he was ill, singing to him the old lullabies, offering comfort where no one else would. On this particular day, The palace was preparing for the grandest celebration in 15 years. The king, now 22, and having completed his training, was returning to officially take the throne from the Regent Council. And every room gleamed, every surface sparkled. Every servant worked frantically to ensure perfection, because failure meant punishment, and Mrs. Rothschild's temper was legendary. Alina had been assigned to serve drinks during the welcome feast, a task usually given to the younger, prettier maids. And she knew immediately it was meant as humiliation, a chance for the nobles to have sport with the simple old maid. And sure enough, as she entered the ballroom, carrying a heavy tray of crystal glasses filled with ruby wine, Lady Cordelia stuck out her foot deliberately, hidden beneath her voluminous skirts, and exhausted from 3 days of sleepless preparation, didn't see it until it was too late, and she fell, the tray flying, glasses shattering in a spectacular cascade of crystal and crimson across the white marble, and the room exploded in laughter, not polite chuckles, but cruel, roaring laughter, with Lord Harrison slapping his knee and shouting, "Even a dog can be trained to walk properly," and Lady Cordelia covering her mouth in mock concern while her eyes glittered with malice, and the other servants backed away quickly, knowing that proximity to failure meant shared punishment, leaving Alina alone on her hands and knees in the spreading wine, her worn dress soaked, her gray hair falling from its pins, her face burning with shame not for herself but for what humanity had become in this place, for how easily people found joy in another's suffering. She was reaching for the broken crystal, her fingers trembling, when the laughter stopped, as if someone had cut the sound from the world, and she felt the change in the air, the sudden silence, the collective intake of breath. And slowly she lifted her head to see every person in the room turn toward the entrance, bowing deeply, and there in the doorway stood a young man in royal military dress, tall and broad-shouldered, with golden hair and blue eyes that swept the room with something between disappointment and recognition. And those eyes stopped on her, widened, and filled with something that looked like wonder, like disbelief, like joy. The young King IV, that was who he was, though Elena's mind couldn't yet process it. Couldn't connect this commanding figure with the frightened child she'd held walked into the ballroom, his boots clicking on the marble, and every step echoed in the absolute silence as nobles and servants alike remained frozen in their bows, confused by his trajectory, because he was not walking toward the throne, or the Regent Council, or any of the important personages waiting to greet him. He was walking directly toward the maid kneeling in broken glass and spilled wine, and when he reached her, he did something that sent shock rippling through every witness. He knelt down beside her, heedless of the wine soaking into his ceremonial uniform, and he said in a voice rough with emotion, "I have been searching for you for 15 years. Alina stared at him, her mind spinning, and then she saw the same blue eyes. The same small scar above his left eyebrow, where he'd scratched himself on a branch during his fever delirium. The same way of tilting his head slightly when he looked at someone. And her breath caught, and she whispered, "Little one," and his face broke into a smile so radiant that several people gasped. And he said, "You called me that, when I was lost, when I thought I would die in those woods. You called me little one, and you sang to me. And you asked for nothing, and I never forgot. I could never forget. I have had artists draw your face from my memory. I have sent soldiers to search every village, and here you were, here in my own palace. And he looked around at the room, his expression hardening. They treated you like this." Mrs. Rothschild's face had gone the color of old parchment. Lady Cordelia looked as if she might faint. Lord Harrison had backed toward the door, and every servant who had ever mocked Alina stood frozen in various states of horror, understanding dawning that they had tormented someone precious to the king, someone whose kindness had quite literally saved the monarchy. The king stood, and with utmost gentleness, he helped Alina to her feet, removing his own ceremonial cloak and wrapping it around her shoulders, and then, before the entire assembled court, Before the nobles and diplomats and military officers and servants, he bowed to her, a deep formal bow of the kind reserved for visiting monarchs and the highest honors. And he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, "This woman, when I was a child, lost and dying, saved my life and asked for nothing in return. She gave me shelter, food, warmth, and comfort when she had little herself. She sang to me and told me I was meant for great things. And then she let me go without claiming any reward or recognition. And that, all of you who call yourselves noble, that is true nobility. That is the standard to which I will hold this court from this day forward, and anyone who cannot meet it will not remain in my service." The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of someone weeping. It was the young stable boy Elena had been feeding, overwhelmed by seeing his only friend honored, and then slowly, tentatively, others began to bow. First, the servants who had secretly been grateful for Elena's hidden kindnesses, then the guards who respected the king's clear conviction, then finally, reluctantly, the nobles who understood that the entire power structure had just shifted. Elena, overwhelmed, swayed slightly, and the king caught her arm, his eyes concerned, and she said softly, "Your Majesty, I don't need recognition. I only did what anyone should do, what I hope anyone would do for a child in need." And he said, "I know, and that is exactly why you deserve it, because you understand that goodness is its own purpose. But that doesn't mean goodness should go unacknowledged or unrewarded. For far too long, this palace has celebrated the wrong things: wealth, status, appearance, power, and I intend to change that, starting now, starting with you." Over the following hours, as the celebration continued in a far more subdued manner, the true story emerged through the king's memories and Elena's quiet confirmation. How she had been a widow, living simply at the forest's edge. How she had found him collapsed near her cottage during the storm. How she had risked the last of her resources to save a child she didn't know was royalty, caring only that he was a child who needed help. How she had refused the guards' offers of reward because I did it for him, not for payment, and how she had fallen on hardship years later and come to the palace seeking honest work, never revealing her identity because she had never sought recognition and saw no reason to claim past deeds for present gain. The king listened to how she had been treated, his jaw tightening as servants, emboldened by his clear protection, began to speak up about the cruelties they had witnessed, and by evening, Mrs. Rothschild had been dismissed. Lady Cordelia and Lord Harrison had been strongly encouraged to retire to their country estates indefinitely, and a new standard had been declared. The palace would be a place of dignity for all who worked honestly within its walls. Elena was offered rooms in the royal wing, a position as the king's personal advisor, wealth, titles, anything she could want. But she smiled and said, "I would like to continue working, if I may, but perhaps in the gardens. I have always loved growing things, and I would like a small cottage on the grounds where I can have some quiet. And perhaps, if your Majesty is willing, I would like to help train the young servants, to teach them that their work has dignity, that they have worth, regardless of their station." And the king, understanding that she was teaching him still, agreed with a laugh that held both joy and a few tears. In the months that followed, the palace transformed, not in its physical structure, but in its soul, with Elena as the gentle presence who reminded everyone from the highest noble to the lowest scullery maid that kindness cost nothing and was worth everything, that true strength lay in lifting others, that the measure of a person was found not in what they demanded but in what they gave freely. She became a beloved figure, sought out for advice, for comfort, for her quiet wisdom, and the young king often walked with her in the gardens she tended, learning from her the lessons that no tutor had taught him, that leadership was service, that power was responsibility, that the crown he wore was not a symbol of his elevation above others, but of his commitment to them. On the anniversary of that first day, The king held a ceremony in which he established the Order of the Gentle Heart, an honor recognizing those who served others selflessly, and Alina was its first recipient. And though she accepted it with humility, he could see the tears in her eyes, and he knew they were not for the honor itself but for what it represented, a kingdom learning to value what truly mattered. That evening, as the sun set over the palace gardens, the king found Alina sitting on a bench near the roses she had planted, and he sat beside her, and she opened the silver locket she always wore, showing him for the first time what was inside: a small, pressed flower, the same kind that had grown near her old cottage, the same kind he had picked for her the morning the guards came to take him home, a child's gift that she had treasured for 15 years. "I told you that you were meant for great things," she said softly, "and you are proving me right, not because of your crown, but because of your heart." And he took her weathered hand in his, and said, "If I have any goodness in me, it is because you planted it there when I needed it most, when I was lost and afraid, and you showed me what it meant to be truly found." And together they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. A king and a maid, a child and his savior, two souls who had found each other twice in one lifetime, and in doing so had changed not just their own stories, but the story of an entire kingdom, proving that true nobility has nothing to do with birth or wealth or power, and everything to do with the choices we make when no one is watching, the kindness we offer when there is no reward, the love we give when we have every reason to withhold it, and the grace we show even to those who have shown us none.